So it made me laugh. I was reading the comfort and joy boards out there, and on the joy side, granted, no one else has been here except for you. On the joy side, somebody wrote coffee. And I thought, yeah, these are 8:30 people, and someone else wrote Diet Dew. I was like, okay, there you go. So hey, I want to say thank you so much for being here. And when we kind of switched service times and did all this other stuff to make space for people, we knew that it was a small sacrifice coming here a little earlier. But I just want to say how grateful I am that you're the kind of people who would be willing to do that. So would you? I know this is awkward, but would you give yourselves a round of applause? Because I think that matters. So that was a nice muted round of applause for yourself. You're like, well, all right, I guess we. So today, this is what I want to do. We're starting this series, Comfort and Joy, and I just kind of want to let you know this from the start. I don't think today you're going to learn anything, and I know that's setting the bar really high for myself right there. But here's what I want to do: is when you walk out today, I don't want you. I want you to feel something. And what we're doing throughout this series, I think, is going to be interesting as we look at these different characters. But I want you to feel something, not necessarily that you haven't felt before, but maybe being open to something new that maybe hasn't been there before. So that's my goal today. And so as we're going through this stuff, you may at times have trouble tracking with this and go, well, how does this connect to this? Where are we going here? And I just want to tell you, just like, hold on, because I'm going to reference some things. They're going to seem a little crazy in the moment, but at the end, I hope we can all land in the same spot. And today for us kind of starts this entering into the Christmas season. And in Christian circles, this is often called the season of Advent. And one of the central kind of images of the Advent season is the Advent wreath and the Advent candles that are part of it. And I don't know how many of you in your house or maybe another church that you might have been a part of grew up with this, but it's 5 different candles. And the 4 purple candles, sometimes some churches switch it, sometimes the middle candle's purple, other times it's white. But the 4 smaller candles represent hope, joy, peace, and love. And then the center candle represents Christ. And so it's kind of this, the church that I grew up in, they would light it like one a Sunday leading up to it, and then they'd light the last one Christmas Eve. So for each one, it was like, now we're focused on hope entering the world, and joy, and peace, and love, until Jesus actually came. And it was this, like, it was cool. I enjoyed it. I thought it was neat. And for all the like hecticness and craziness that came with the Christmas season, I thought it was nice to just kind of have this like small pause and focus and remembrance. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And I know many of you celebrate that kind of like in your home with your families, and I think that's cool. But here's the problem that I had with it as I realized as I was growing up is that it didn't give an accurate representation of what the first Christmas was like. And every single time I saw like nativity scenes, everything was like super peaceful and super chill and like really solemn and quiet. And I'd say like it just felt sacred, and it was sacred. But as I kind of leaf through it and as I read the story of Christmas, I think it felt a lot more like Home Alone than it felt like Silent Night, if we could say it like that. Because just get this picture. I don't know how many of you, like for those of you who have been part of a birth, you gave birth, your wife gave birth, you were there in the room or something like that. Like we have Mary is very pregnant and has to travel a long distance on a donkey to take a census. Like, who gets excited about a census anyway? And so, like, she's got all this stuff that she's got to do while she's 8 months pregnant. They go to the hotel. There is no room. And so they go to a barn, and she has a baby amid livestock, like animals, cows, sheep, like all these things surrounding her outside. And I think, like, and then we, like, get the picture of, like, the star above, and the cows are, like, sitting down beside her quietly. And I think, like, that is not how it was. Like, I promise you, that is not how, I promise you, things were a little crazy. Like, they were kind of losing their minds and a little, I don't know, I'm sure they was full of anxiety at that first Christmas. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. Because what happens is, and what I felt happened to me in my life, is that when we tell the story of Christmas simply as like cows gently laying down, this is my metaphor for cows gently laying down apparently, so if we ever play charades together and I do this is cow laying down. And like just kind of this like super still, silent night, quiet scene, what happens to me is all of a sudden the story becomes unrelatable. And the characters within it, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, all of a sudden these become not people who had real struggles, real feelings, real thoughts, but they just become figurines that we put in the nativity scenes. Oh, that's Joseph, and he's standing like this, and this is Mary, and she's like this. And it's kind of like when we divorce people, when we take them out of the actual setting, what happens is we change the story. And all of a sudden, it's no longer our story. It's no longer people we can relate to and people we can identify with. They just become something distant. And so let me explain it like this. I think when we change the setting, we change the story. One of my favorite things at this time of year is Christmas movies. I thoroughly enjoy Christmas movies. And my 3 young girls, they caught like a 10-minute glimpse of Home Alone the other night, and they loved it, which fills me with such hope and such joy. Like, yes, thank goodness. But one of my favorite Christmas movies is It's a Wonderful Life. Is anyone like It's a Wonderful? Oh, there we go. Like, there we go. Some of us will raise our hands for that. We like that. And I just love that movie. I think it's fantastic. And without ruining the story, because some of you need to watch it because it's an amazing movie, I want to show you just a small clip of one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And I'm not going to give background or explain it, but I just want to give you a feeling of what the scene is like. So could we go ahead and look at it? Well, again, without any background, I just wanted to give you like a feeling for that moment in the story, and then everybody joins in together and they sing "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." And I thought, what if we changed the setting? Like, what would happen to the story if we changed the setting of the story? How would it change how we identify with the characters? How would it change how we understood what happened? And so I thought, what if we made like what many would consider a slight improvement, others would consider an abhorrent evil. What if we changed the soundtrack to It's a Wonderful Life from Hark the Herald Angels Sing to maybe something a little more timely, like the soundtrack from the Transformers movie? I thought, what would happen if we changed that? And this is what it would look like. And the cops come in. I think that's hilarious. Like, all of a sudden, it's like this triumphal entry. That cracks me up. Here's why I do that. And I know, oh, how could you do that to It's a Wonderful Life? I know, don't worry. I won't ever do it again. But when we change the setting, we change the story. And we need to understand that because the story of Christmas, I think, has a lot more to do with us than we could ever imagine. The people who are in it and the situations that they face and the anxieties and struggles and fears that they're dealing with has a lot more to say to us at this time of year than we would have ever guessed. So this is what I want to do is today we're going to look at the first character in the story, and we're going to look at the person of Joseph. So if you have a copy of the scriptures with you, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1, and this is what I'm going to focus on. We're going to start in verse 18, and I want to focus on not necessarily what do we see, what happened, all these other things. I want to focus on what Joseph would have felt. And I know that's kind of weird because the Bible is not written like a novel. And so character development and identifying with their feelings is not the most supreme thing that they put in there. But we do get some clues from this account as to what Joseph would have felt. So this is what it says. Matthew 1, starting in verse 18. It says, "This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together," and I'm not going to do biblical interpretation as to what came together means. I'll let you figure that out for yourself, okay? "But before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law, and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly." Now, I want to pause right there. I want to look at that. This is what we usually talk about when we get to that moment, is we say, okay, so Joseph was a righteous person. Like, Joseph knew the law, he knew it was a command, and so in their days, engagements were different. Like, when you were engaged, it was like you were married. Engagements weren't broken off almost ever, and so he actually had to go through steps of divorce, and that's usually where we focus. Like, Joseph was righteous, and so he goes to divorce Mary. But let's look at some other things. Let's say it like this. What if that's you? What if you're there in this situation, and you're in the first century, and I don't know exactly what they had in terms of biology classes, but Joseph apparently knew how babies came about. He knew that how it worked, and he knew he hadn't been a part of that yet. And so all of a sudden he gets this news that Mary is pregnant. And he goes, no. And he begins to distance himself. And he makes plans to distance himself. And I think that's fascinating that it all of a sudden shows us, not that Joseph did it rashly, but he begins to make a plan. It's interesting as I talk to couples who are looking at getting married, or as couples get more serious, how much planning has been done without ever putting anything down on paper. And it's funny, as people are growing closer and as they're looking towards next steps in their life, it's amazing how through just hundreds and hundreds of informal conversations, what accurate plans they build with each other in terms of what they're going to do and where they're going to live and what their life is going to look like. And would they get married? Might they get married? When would they get married? How would all these things play out? And it's not like anyone would ever go put down a piece of, this is our plan. But through all these conversations over and over again, a vision of what the rest of their life is going to look like begins to be established. A dream they have for their future is there. And I think that we must assume that that is where Joseph and Mary are as well. That here they are young, they are teenagers. And they are about to take this big step of getting married. And so we can only assume that there have been hundreds and hundreds of little conversations of, what are we going to do? Where are we going to live? What are you going to do? Joseph, I'm going to be a carpenter. Okay, what's our life going to look like? How many kids are we going to have? What are we going to name them? Do we want boys? Do we want girls? We have no control over this, but let's hope anyway. And just kind of like all these conversations to establish their life. And then all of a sudden, in one moment, it completely changes for Joseph. Like all of a sudden, in 1 second, the life that he thought he was entering into is taken away. When word comes to him that Mary is pregnant. And so I think it's important that we understand this, that Joseph's story is not just a story of Christmas, but Joseph's story is a story about what happens to you when the dream you had for your life, or the hope you had for your life, all of a sudden is taken away and replaced by a new one. And we get a further look in terms of what Joseph felt and what he's feeling. Let me continue this on. This is verse 20. It says, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife. That says volumes. And so the angel identifies something for us that we wouldn't have known otherwise, that Joseph is scared. I think that's huge. Let me ask you, how would you respond? Like if that's you, and all of a sudden you've gotten news, whatever that is, and all of a sudden in a moment your life has changed. All of a sudden, just in 1 second, everything becomes different. And it's this, Joseph's not mad, which is, I think, where many of us find ourselves when that happens. Joseph is scared. Joseph is scared. For me, I know this. When I establish plans for my life, I can find myself very comfortable within those plans. I kind of make my way into it. And it's I know what it looks like to live in the plan that I have established for my life. But when all of a sudden that plan gets changed, I don't know what to do. And it's terrifying to me. It is. Because not only do I not know what it's going to look like, what I have to do, I don't know how it changes me. I don't know the person I need to become to live in this different plan. And so Joseph is in this spot where the dream he has is taken away from him. And it's replaced by a new one. I'm going to finish reading through this part, but we'll really get into the details later. So it says, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage. They came together until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. And so Joseph has a lot at stake here. For him, his dream is taken away. His reputation is on the line, like it really is. That's what it says. Because he was someone who fulfilled the law, he went to divorce her. He did it quietly, but he went to divorce her. And so his dream is taken away. His reputation, he feels, is on the line, and he's scared. And so how does he respond? I think the more important question is, how would you respond? Because, again, we need to establish this. The Christmas story is not another story. The Christmas story is our story. It's how we go through life when all of a sudden life takes a turn for the worse that we couldn't possibly expect. Dr. Brene Brown says it like this. I find this fascinating. She says, everything can unravel if we're not willing to be brave in the moment we most want to self-protect. Everything can unravel. Everything we've worked for, everything in the future, all of a sudden can just poof and go away if we are not willing to be brave in the exact moment we want to self-protect. This is what I know about me, is that when my life changes, my initial reaction is to fight against it. When things don't go my way, my initial response is always to fight against the change and fight against the uncertainty. And what I find within myself continuously is that I distance myself instead of just being fully present. And that doesn't mean that like distance, I don't just mean like I physically distance myself, which sometimes happens, sometimes that's there, but I isolate myself instead of being fully present. It's interesting, one of the carols that we sing at this time of year is God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but in the chorus of this song, it's got this line. It says, it'll bring you great tidings of comfort and joy, with great tidings of comfort and joy. And I wonder this, why do these go together? Why do we assume that comfort and joy go hand in hand? Why are they right there all the time? Because this is what we think. We think that if I am in a place of comfort, then I must also be in a place of joy. But what I found is that is not the case. Is that while comfort and joy may at times go together, that the path to our joy is very rarely on the path of our comfort. It's actually through the path of being brave. And so this is what we see. This is what Brene Brown says, is that in a span when things change, a spot of comfort is when we look to self-protect. But joy is when we're brave. That a spot of comfort is when we isolate ourselves. But joy is when we're willing to engage the struggle, the hurt, and the brokenness. And so this is what I want to do today, is I want to talk about what does it look like to be brave? What does it actually look like to be brave in the moments when life changes, when your reputation you feel like is on the line, and when you're afraid? And to do that, I'm going to turn to, given the word brave was going to seem a likely source, but is a very strange turn for a Christmas message, and I want to talk about the movie Braveheart. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Braveheart. I'm going to give you a quick synopsis real fast. The movie Braveheart, it was released in 1995. It did fantastic in the box offices. It did fantastic with the awards. I forget how many nominations it had. You can see at the bottom that it won 5 Academy Awards, which is a very big deal. And people loved it. People would still say today, this is one of their favorite movies, if not their favorite. And the story goes like this. I'm going to go through this quickly and not spoil much of it for you. It starts with a young boy by the name of William Wallace who lives in the land of Scotland. And William Wallace is in Scotland in a period of time, I believe it's considered the 15th century, whenever the English are the overlords of Scotland. So they are in charge, even though there are actually very few English in Scotland. And so they live in this constant tension between the natives of Scotland and the English overlords, between who is in charge. And so sometimes there's tension. Sometimes there's bitterness. Sometimes there's all-out war for the Scotland people to drive the English out. And so when William Wallace is a young boy, we see an incident where his father is engaged in a battle against the English. And as part of this battle, both his father and mother die. And so William Wallace is left an orphan. And so his uncle comes in and he picks him up, and we just see a glimpse that he's going to raise William Wallace and kind of train him up. And so then it kind of flashes forward, and the next thing we see is that William Wallace is a grown man. And after spending time away with his uncle, he returns to his hometown. And it's kind of this fascinating moment that's incredibly pivotal to the storyline. That when he returns to his hometown, his old friends begin to recognize him. They begin to, oh, this is his son. This is William Wallace. He's back. And they begin to request that he engage with them in battle. That now that he's here, he can take up his father's place against the English, and they can actually wage war against them. But a grown William Wallace doesn't want to fight. And that's pivotal to the story. He doesn't want to fight. He says he wants to raise a family. And so he meets a girl who will one day become his wife. And he says, all I want to do is marry someone, raise a family, and work on a farm. And if I can do that for the rest of my days, then I will be at peace. That is incredibly important, that a story titled Braveheart that we assume is just a movie about war, or a story about war, starts with a character who has no desire to be in battle. And so through various circumstances that I'm not going to get into here, his wife is killed. And all of a sudden things change for him in a moment. And his friends come around him, and he begins to lead this battle against the English. And so it kind of culminates in this moment where he gives this incredible speech in front of all these people, telling them to take up their arms and that God will never take away. The English can take away anything, but they can't take away their freedom. And when this movie came out, when this story came out, it inspired people in a new way. And it was fascinating to track the response of this story and the way that people identified with William Wallace. Because all of a sudden for men talked about like, this is what it looks like to be brave. This is what it looks like to be brave in life. And one of the fascinating things was how women identified with this story. As they said, yeah, a lot of people think it's a guy's movie, but for women, their comment was, I want to be loved like that. I want to know what it's like to be loved like that. And there was this kind of movement that spread that was across several different countries, that these groups would gather together and they would give themselves the title of the Bravehearts. And they would talk about what it looked like to live as if you were brave. It's actually one of the most quoted stories. There's actually a quote on the wall of the Air Force Academy that's attributed to William Wallace. And this is the quote that they have on the wall of the Air Force Academy. It says, in dying in our beds many years from now, would you not trade all the days from that day to this for one chance, just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom? He actually yells it. I wasn't going to yell freedom here because it just felt weird to me. But it's amazing to me how much people identified with William Wallace and how much it inspired them under this banner of Braveheart, of this is what it looks like to live a life that's brave. And here's what's fascinating to me, is we have this quote that's on the wall of the Air Force Academy. But William Wallace didn't say that. I mean, I guess I'm not saying that he couldn't say it. We just have no record of him ever saying anything like that. So we don't know if he did or not. This is all we know about William Wallace. William Wallace was a Scottish fighter in the 15th century who we believe one of his friends may have betrayed him. That's it. That's all we know. And in fact, all we do know was written by a poet 150 years later, and the poet's name was Blind Harry, which I'm not saying anything against Blind Harry, but I wouldn't necessarily trust him for all our historical records. And it's fascinating because people have taken this as, we know William Wallace was a real person, but we've assumed that this is his story and this is everything that he identifies with and this is who he was, when it's a story that was written by a guy by the name of Randall Wallace. And that's incredibly important, that the story of what it looks like to be brave was written by an ordinary person. Now, Randall Wallace, as he's writing this story, has all these different struggles that he's going through in his life. He's got all these different things as he's adjusting to Hollywood life, and he wrote several other movies. We Were Soldiers, Secretariat, Heaven is Real. He wrote the screenplay for these different movies. But as he's writing Braveheart, he has this specific struggle that he's going through, and that is his marriage has fallen apart. And for as poetic as he is, I love how blunt he is when he describes marriage and divorce. This is his line. He says, love is like being in that sacred and magical state all the time. Divorce is like swallowing a live hand grenade, one that blows your guts all over the place. It makes me laugh how blunt he is. Now, this is what's fascinating to me, is that as he's struggling with his divorce, and he has 2 sons with his wife, he's penned this script for Braveheart. And so he's making up a story of what it looks like to be brave while he's struggling with these things in his own life and his tendency to isolate himself. And so as the relationship has gotten worse and worse and worse, from distance to bitterness to anger, and how he describes it of every conversation he has with his ex-wife just becomes a fight and a screaming match over and over again. He does something that is incredibly brave. And he writes a letter to his sons, in a sense to attempt to turn the tide. And so get this. So as he's writing the script for Braveheart and working on this picture of what it looks like to be brave, dealing with his own struggles, of his dream for his life falling apart, his reputation being at stake, and how afraid he is, this is what he writes to his sons. He says, I told them, in the best words I could find, how much I love them. I told them I never wanted them to feel that by loving me, they were being disloyal to their mother, or by loving her, they were being disloyal to me. I told them I remembered vividly the day each of them was born, and that their mother's courage on that day filled me with respect and awe. He goes on to say, I don't know if their mother ever got those letters that I wrote my sons, but somewhere about that point in time, our relationship began to heal. And so as he's writing this play of this epic war movie, he is dealing with the struggle of isolating himself and distancing himself because the dream has fallen apart. His reputation is at stake, and he is scared about what the next day holds. And so this is Joseph's story. Matthew 1, verse 24. It says this. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. That speaks volumes. Like, that is so incredibly important. And we look at that in the moment, we go, okay, so what changed? Like, his dream was still gone. The life that he thought he was going to live was still gone. His reputation, he couldn't explain to everybody. He could go, no, guys, it's okay that Mary's pregnant. It was an angel. And they're like, okay, Joseph, right. Like, if you want to believe, no, I promise you guys, it was an angel. That's how she's pregnant. Like, would that fly today? Would we be like, okay, gotcha. No. And he's still got reason to be scared. But he does something that I think is so incredible, is that in the moment when he would seek to self-protect, he leans in. In a moment that he would have a tendency to isolate himself, he engages in the moment. And I think this is what we see about comfort and joy. That the path to joy is through courage, not comfort. And that the path to joy is through engaging, not isolating. That when things go wrong, when life begins to unravel, all of our immediate gut response is to self-protect. But what it looks like to be brave is to step in and to lean in. You see, we can say it like this. I don't think I need to make a case about how important relationships are for our lives. And we try to tell ourselves at different points in times, no, we don't need that. No, we're fine by ourselves. But I think we need to just establish this. Yes, relationships are so significant. Relationships are what matter. We could actually trace this, I think it'd be interesting to trace this throughout art in history to see how they've stated this over and over again. I want to give you a few examples from more recently. Queen, the great poets, said it like this: "Can anybody find me somebody to love?" The band The White Stripes, a couple who's married who later got divorced, said this: "Every breath that is in your lungs is a tiny little gift to me." And the epic poet, T-Pain, said it's got to be the crunkest, it's got to be the loudest, it's got to be the best love song she ever heard in her life. When I actually typed that in, my autocorrect kept trying to change crunkest to crunchiest. And I had to type it 5 times to actually get crunkest in. No, and so relationships are what's significant, but we need to establish this, that with every relationship we have, something is at stake. Your trust being broken is at stake. Things not working out, somebody not connecting, this is at stake. And because we realize that with every relationship, no matter what it is, something is at stake, we have a tendency to just present the best version of ourselves. And so to our kids, we want to present the most heroic version of ourselves. To our friends, we want to present the most socially acceptable version of ourselves. To our spouse, to significant other, whoever that is, we want to present the most desirable version of ourselves. And so we have this tendency in all these different relationships that we have to present the best version of ourselves, but there is an inherent problem with that when you are presenting the best version of yourself, you are not presenting the real you. Because the real you is not the best version of anything. It's just you. It's just you. And so maybe the path to joy is not through comfort. Maybe the path to joy is through stepping out and being willing in different situations and different environments and different relationships and being willing to go, here I am. This is me. This is what I think Joseph struggled with. This is, I think, the decision Joseph faced. Is, do I hide? Do I run? Or all of a sudden, when my life changes and my reputation is at stake and I'm afraid, am I willing to engage and simply say, here I am? And you may ask, how can we do that? How can I actually do that when there's so much that could go wrong? And let me show it to you very quickly. 3 verses. 1 Chronicles, it says this: "Be strong and courageous and do the work. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you." In Deuteronomy 31:6, it says this: "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." And in Joshua 1:9, it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." 3 verses in different parts of Scripture that say one thing. Have courage because God is with you. Have courage because God is with you. And it always concerns me when people say, and I hear this often, and for some reason in our culture, we've kind of gotten this, that this is a badge of honor. People will say, well, I don't care what other people think. I just don't care what other people think. And that always kind of scares me, because if you don't care at all what other people think, there is no capacity to connect in your life. What's happened is you've placed yourself in a position absolutely above everyone else. And so there's no ability to connect. But I think this is the better alternative. Care what people think, but do not be defined by it. Never allow yourself to be defined by what people think. Instead, allow yourself to be defined by the one who will never leave you, who is always with you, and who cares about you more than anyone else. And so what would it look like for us to engage when we would rather isolate? What would it look like for us to lean in when we usually want to step back? What would it look like for a relationship that maybe has stalemated and grown cold, for us to take that first step forward? What would it look like for us to be brave when we want to self-protect. Let me pray for us. Father, I pray that in these moments we can take a cue from Joseph, who 2,000 years ago decided that he was going to lean in. And God, I can't imagine how many marriages, how many relationships, how many friendships, how many parent to son and daughter relationships, how many families might be saved if we chose to engage with those around us. Father, I pray that we become a people who do not define others as our enemies, but we only see friends who struggle, who are hurt, who are broken, who have wounds, and who are desperately seeking for someone to extend a hand to them. May this be what we're defined by. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.